7 years of what I thought was a perfect marriage shattered in an instant when my wife looked me straight in the eyes and said those 7 devastating words: "Don't touch me. I can't stand you." Something had changed. The woman who once couldn't keep her hands off me now recoiled at my touch. What dark secret was she hiding? Why had she suddenly become a stranger in our own home? The truth I uncovered would force me to make the hardest decision of my life, one that no man should ever have to face. My name is Dwayne Pierce. I'm 46 years old, and until last year, I thought I had the perfect marriage. 7 years with my wife Rebecca, Becky to her friends and me, and not a single day where I doubted we'd grow old together. She was 38, still turned heads everywhere we went, and somehow she'd chosen me. We had our routines, our inside jokes, our way of moving through life as a team. No major arguments, no cold shoulders, no sleeping on the couch. We had what most couples dream about: stability, respect, and enough love to weather any storm. Or so I thought. Looking back now, I can see the warning signs that were right in front of my face. They started small, barely noticeable in the day-to-day rhythm of our lives together. The way she stopped greeting me at the door when I came home. The texts she'd quickly hide when I walked into the room. The sudden interest in girls' nights out twice a week instead of the usual monthly catch-up with their friends. At first, I chalked it up to normal relationship changes. Maybe we were settling into a more comfortable phase of marriage. Maybe she was just going through something at work. Maybe I was overthinking things. But then came the mood swings. One minute, she'd be completely normal, laughing at something on TV. The next, she'd snap at me for asking a simple question like what she wanted for dinner. When I'd ask if something was wrong, the answer was always the same: "I'm fine, Dwayne. Just tired." For months, this dance continued. The distance between us growing wider by the day, though we still slept in the same bed and went through the motions of married life. Our conversations became shorter, less meaningful. The warmth in her voice when she said my name had disappeared, replaced by something that sounded almost like indifference. I tried to ignore it, to convince myself it was all in my head. After all, every marriage has its ups and downs, right? But deep down, in that place where a man knows the truth, even when he doesn't want to face it, I knew something had changed. Something fundamental was broken, and I had no idea how to fix it. I'm not the kind of man who panics at the first sign of trouble. I've always believed that relationships take work, that you weather the storms together and come out stronger on the other side. So when things with Becky started changing, I took it upon myself to fix whatever was broken. I started planning date nights, took her to that fancy Italian place downtown she'd been wanting to try, bought tickets to see her favorite band when they came through town, even started handling more around the house, thinking maybe she was just overwhelmed with everyday responsibilities. "You seem stressed lately," I said one night as we were getting ready for bed. "Is everything okay?" "Everything's fine," she answered, not meeting my eyes in the mirror as she removed her makeup. "Just tired from work, that's all." But it wasn't just work. I knew it, and deep down, I think she knew I knew it too. The phone that used to sit face up on the coffee table was now always face down or in her pocket. She'd started taking calls in another room, her voice too low for me to hear what she was saying. She changed her phone password, said it was because of some security update at work, but she'd never bothered with that kind of thing before. One Saturday morning, I suggested we drive up to the lake house we sometimes rented for weekend getaways, a place we'd made many happy memories. "I can't this weekend," she said, scrolling through her phone as she spoke. "I promised Jenny I'd help her shop for her mom's birthday. What about next weekend?" "I'll have to check my calendar." She never did check that calendar. Or if she did, she never mentioned the lake house again. The physical distance was the hardest part. Becky had always been an affectionate woman, holding hands while watching TV, kissing me goodbye every morning, curling up against me in bed at night. All of that stopped. Now she sat on the opposite end of the couch, rolled away from me in bed, flinched when my hand accidentally brushed hers passing the salt at dinner. 3 months without intimacy passed before I really started to worry. Not just about the lack of sex, but about what it meant for us. I tried initiating a few times, but she always had an excuse: headache, early meeting the next day, just not in the mood. Eventually, I stopped trying. The rejection was too painful, and the look of something close to relief on her face when I stopped pushing was even worse. I started searching online for answers. Wife suddenly distant. Wife not interested in sex. Signs your wife is unhappy. I read article after article, forum post after forum post. Some suggested marriage counseling. Others hinted at darker possibilities, depression, medical issues, or the one I was trying hardest not to consider, an affair. Still, I wasn't ready to give up. Wasn't ready to admit that the woman I loved, the woman I had built my life around, might be slipping away. So I kept trying, kept reaching out, even as she continued to pull back. By the 4th month of Becky's strange behavior, I was at my wit's end. I tried everything the relationship experts suggested. I'd given her space. I tried to talk it out. I planned special moments. Nothing worked. The woman I married was physically present, but emotionally gone. One evening, after another silent dinner where the only sound were forks scraping against plates, I decided to make one last attempt. I'd read that sometimes when couples drift apart, recreating happy memories can help reignite what's been lost. Hey, I said, trying to sound casual. I was thinking about that trip we took to Napa Valley for our 3rd anniversary. Remember that little vineyard with the string lights and the jazz band? Becky looked up from her plate, a flicker of something. Recognition? Nostalgia, crossing her face before it disappeared behind that now familiar mask of indifference. What about it? I was thinking maybe we could go back there next weekend. Just the two of us. Get away from everything for a few days. She hesitated, her fork suspended midway to her mouth. For a split second, I thought I'd broken through whatever wall she'd built between us. I don't think that's a good idea, she finally said, resuming her meal. I have a lot going on at work right now. The weekend after, then? Or the one after that? Whenever works for you. Dwayne, please. I'm just not interested in going to Napa right now. Not I can't. Not it's not a good time. But I'm just not interested. Those words hit harder than any outright rejection because they were honest. She wasn't interested. Not in Napa, and maybe not in us either. That night, I lay awake beside her sleeping form, staring at the ceiling, trying to figure out where we'd gone wrong. Had I missed something? Had I taken her for granted? Was there someone else? The thought had crossed my mind more than once, but I'd always pushed it away. Becky wouldn't do that. Not the woman I'd married. But was she still that woman? The next day, I left work early. I needed to clear my head, think things through away from the suffocating silence of our home. I drove to Patterson Park and spent an hour walking around the lake, watching couples holding hands, families playing with their kids, solitary joggers lost in their music. Normal people living normal lives, their relationships intact. I envied them. When I got home, Becky's car wasn't in the driveway. No surprise there. She'd been coming home later and later, claiming work was busy. I called her office once, early on. Her assistant said she'd left hours earlier. I never called again, afraid of what I might learn. I went inside, dropped my keys on the counter, and headed upstairs to change out of my work clothes. As I passed the bathroom, something caught my eye. The hamper was open, and on top was a blouse I didn't recognize, deep red, silky, not Becky's usual style. Next to it was a receipt that had fallen out of pocket. Dinner for two at Morton Steakhouse. Last Thursday, the night she'd told me she was having dinner with her college roommate who was in town for a business trip. My stomach clenched. I sat down on the edge of the bathtub, the receipt clutched in my hand, the evidence I'd been avoiding staring me in the face. I didn't confront Becky about the receipt right away. Part of me wanted to believe there was an innocent explanation, that my mind was just jumping to the worst possible conclusion. Maybe she really had been with her college roommate, and they'd just chosen a different restaurant. Maybe she'd paid for a business dinner and forgotten to submit it for reimbursement. 1,000 maybes, none of them convincing. For the next few days, I watched her more closely. The late nights continued. The distant behavior intensified. Now that I was paying attention, really paying attention, I noticed other things too. The way she'd step outside to take certain calls. How she'd started showering as soon as she got home from work. The mysterious weekend errands that kept her out of the house for hours. Each observation was another nail in the coffin of our marriage. One night, after a particularly tense dinner where we barely exchanged 10 words, I found myself lying in bed, staring at the ceiling fans spinning lazily above us. Becky was on her side, her back to me, the space between us more like a canyon than the few inches it actually was. I thought about all those articles I'd read, the ones that suggested physical touch could rebuild emotional connection. Maybe that was the answer. Maybe we drifted so far apart physically that it was affecting everything else. Maybe if I could just bridge that gap, things would start to improve. I rolled over and gently placed my hand on her shoulder. "Beck," I said softly, using the nickname from our early days together. She stiffened instantly, like my touch had sent an electric shock through her body. "What?" Her voice was cold, impatient. "I miss you," I said, and I meant it. I missed the woman who used to laugh at my bad jokes and curl up next to me on rainy Sunday mornings. I missed the warmth of her smile, the sound of her voice when she was excited about something. I missed us. "Can we talk? Really talk? Something's wrong," and I never got to finish that sentence. Becky jerked away from my touch, rolling over to face me with an expression I'd never seen before, a mixture of irritation and something that looked disturbingly like disgust. "My wife told me, 'Don't touch me. I can't stand you.'" The words hung in the air between us, harsh and final. For a moment, I couldn't breathe, couldn't think, couldn't do anything but stare at this woman who had once promised to love me forever and now couldn't even bear my touch. "What did I do?" I finally managed to ask, my voice barely above a whisper. "Whatever it is, we can fix it. We can go to counseling, take some time away, whatever you need. Just talk to me, Beck." She didn't answer, just looked at me with those cold, distant eyes, then rolled back over, pulling the covers tightly around her, as if to create a barrier between us. I lay there in the dark, the finality of her words sinking in. "I can't stand you. Not, 'I'm angry with you,' or 'I'm upset about something you did,' but 'I can't stand you.'" Like my very existence repulsed her. In that moment, something broke inside me, something fundamental and irreparable. The hope I'd been clinging to, that whatever was wrong could be fixed with enough effort and understanding, died a quick, brutal death. Because you can't fix someone not being able to stand you. You can't rebuild from that foundation. I got up quietly and went downstairs to the guest room, where I spent the rest of the night staring at the ceiling, replaying her words over and over in my mind. By morning, I knew what I had to do. After that night, after those words that I couldn't unhear, something changed in me. I stopped asking questions, stopped trying to salvage what was clearly beyond repair. Instead, I started watching, really watching, gathering information like a detective building a case. I moved my things to the guest room without discussion. Becky didn't object. If anything, she seemed relieved, which only confirmed what I already knew. Our marriage was over in everything but name. But I needed to understand why. Needed to know what had happened to the woman who once couldn't keep her hands off me, who used to look at me like I was her whole world. So I watched and noted patterns that I'd been too blind to see before. Becky had started falling asleep in odd places, nodding off at the kitchen table with her laptop open, dozing on the couch in the middle of the afternoon with her phone still in her hand. She'd never been a napper before, never had trouble staying awake through a movie or a long dinner conversation. She looked exhausted all the time, dark circles under her eyes despite supposedly getting a full night's sleep. Some mornings, I'd hear her rushing to the bathroom, the unmistakable sounds of someone being sick coming through the door. She'd emerge pale, blaming food poisoning or a stomach bug. And then there were the unexplained absences, longer and more frequent than before. She'd leave the house without saying where she was going, return hours later looking distracted and offering only vague explanations if I happened to be around to ask. Just running errands, she'd say, or catching up with friends, never specifying which errands or which friends. One afternoon, I came home early from work, a splitting headache forcing me to call it a day. Becky's car wasn't in the driveway, though she should have been home by then according to her usual schedule. I went inside, took some painkillers, and lay down on the couch in the living room, planning to rest for a bit before heading up to the guest room. I must have fallen asleep because the next thing I knew, I was waking up to the sound of keys in the front door. I stayed perfectly still, eyes closed, curious to see how Becky would act when she thought no one was watching. She came in quietly, setting her bag down on the entryway table. I heard her soft footsteps heading toward the kitchen, then the sound of the refrigerator opening and closing, a glass being filled with water. Normal, everyday sounds. Then her phone rang. Her voice changed instantly when she answered, becoming warm, animated in a way it hadn't been with me in months. "Hey," she said softly, almost a whisper. No, it's okay. He's not home yet. A pause. I know. I'm trying to figure it out. Another pause, longer this time. I can't just. She stopped abruptly, lowering her voice even further. I can't talk about this now. I'll call you back later. She ended the call and sighed deeply. I heard her moving toward the living room and quickly closed my eyes again, maintaining the illusion of sleep. She paused in the doorway. I could feel her gaze on me, then continued upstairs without a word. That night, I lay awake in the guest room, the pieces finally falling into place. The exhaustion, the morning sickness, the secretive phone calls, the emotional withdrawal. My wife was pregnant, and the baby wasn't mine. I've never considered myself a dramatic man. I don't throw things when I'm angry or make scenes in public. I deal with problems head-on, calmly and rationally. But discovering your wife is pregnant with another man's child isn't the kind of problem that allows for calm rationality. I spent the next few days and a days going through the motions at work, avoiding Becky at home. I needed to be sure before I made any moves. Needed concrete evidence beyond my suspicions. I thought about confronting her directly, demanding answers, forcing a confession. But something held me back. Maybe pride. Maybe fear of what I'd hear. Or maybe I just didn't want to give her the satisfaction of seeing me broken. So I made a decision. One I never thought I'd make in a million years. I hired a private investigator. Joe was a retired cop who'd started his own PI business. A friend of a friend recommended him. Said he was discreet and thorough. Two qualities I desperately needed right now. You sure about this? Joe asked after I'd explained the situation. Once you know, you can't unknow. I'm sure, I said, though my churning stomach suggested otherwise. A week later, Joe called. We have confirmation, he said, his voice matter of fact. Your wife has been meeting a man named Edwin Daniels at the Bridgeport Hotel every Tuesday and Thursday afternoon for the past 3 months. I have photos, hotel receipts, everything you need. Edwin Daniels. The name meant nothing to me. Was he someone from her work? A stranger she'd met at a bar? An old flame rekindled? In the end, it didn't matter. What mattered was that while I'd been working to support our life together, my wife had been giving herself to another man. I thanked Joe, hung up, and sat in my car for a long time, staring at nothing. I had my answer now. The confirmation I'd been seeking. My marriage was over. Had been for months, though I'd been too blind to see it. I could have confronted Becky right then and there. Could have thrown the evidence in her face, watched her squirm, demanded explanations. Part of me wanted to. The hurt, angry part that couldn't believe this was happening to us, to me. But another, calmer part knew that confrontation wouldn't change anything. The damage was done. Our marriage was beyond saving. So I made another decision. I would divorce her, but I wouldn't tell her it was coming. Wouldn't give her time to prepare or make excuses or twist things around. She'd blindsided me with her betrayal. I would blindside her with the consequences. I called a lawyer the next day. Jason Winters, a guy I'd met through a golf tournament a few years back. He specialized in divorce cases and had a reputation for being thorough and discreet. Exactly what I needed. I'll need documentation, Jason said after I explained my situation. Financial records, property information, evidence of the affair if you want to use that. I assured him I had everything he needed and would bring it to our meeting the next day. That meant going home and gathering documents from my office, bank statements, investment records, the deed to our house. Papers I'd need to begin the divorce process. I chose a time when I knew Becky would be out, supposedly at a department meeting that ran late every Wednesday. Now I knew she was probably with him, with Edwin. The house was quiet when I arrived. I went straight to my home office and started gathering what I needed. Financial statements from the filing cabinet, property records from the desk drawer. I worked methodically, trying to stay focused on the task at hand rather than the reason for it. As I searched for our marriage certificate, which I vaguely remembered storing with other important documents, I came across a folder I didn't recognize. Inside was a sealed envelope, and inside that envelope was an ultrasound image. I stared at it, my heart pounding. The date on the scan confirmed what I'd suspected. Becky was about 10 weeks pregnant. For a moment, a tiny part of me wondered, could it be mine? We hadn't been intimate in months, but maybe, just maybe... I checked the date again, did some quick math. No, the timing didn't work. This baby couldn't possibly be mine. As the reality sank in, I felt something break inside me. The last thread of hope I'd been clinging to, that maybe this was all a terrible misunderstanding, that we could somehow find our way back to each other, snapped like a wire pulled too tight. I put the ultrasound back exactly as I'd found it, gathered the rest of my documents, and left the house. Becky never knew I'd been there. That night, I stayed at a hotel. Couldn't bear to be in the same house with her, knowing what I now knew. I told her I had an early meeting the next day, and it made more sense to stay closer to the office. Another lie in a marriage that had become nothing but lies. As I lay in that impersonal hotel room, staring at the ceiling, I made my decision. No more waiting. No more gathering evidence. It was time to end this farce of a marriage once and for all. I would confront Becky when I got home tomorrow, force her to admit the truth she'd been hiding, and then I would tell her about the divorce papers that were already being prepared. It was over. I drove home the next evening with my stomach in knots. The divorce papers were being prepared, but I couldn't wait for them to be ready. I needed answers now. Needed to hear Becky admit what she'd done. Maybe part of me still hoped there was an explanation, some reason that would make sense of her betrayal. She was home when I arrived, sitting at the kitchen table with her laptop open in front of her. She looked up briefly when I walked in, then back at her screen. No greeting. No smile. The woman I'd once been so in love with couldn't even be bothered to say hello. "We need to talk," I said, keeping my voice steady despite the anger and hurt churning inside me. "Can it wait? I'm in the middle of something." "No," I said firmly. "It can't wait." She sighed, closed her laptop, and finally looked at me. "What is it?" I'd rehearsed this moment in my head a dozen times on the drive home. Had planned to ease into it, to be calm and collected. But standing there, facing the woman who had shattered our life together, all my carefully prepared words evaporated. "How long have you been pregnant?" I asked bluntly. The color drained from her face. Her mouth opened slightly, but no words came out. For a long moment, we just stared at each other in silence. I was going to tell you," she finally stammered. "When? After the baby was born? Or were you planning to pass it off as mine somehow?" My voice was rising now, the anger I'd been suppressing for weeks finally breaking through. "It's not what you think. Don't lie to me." I cut her off. "Not anymore. I know about Edwin Daniels. I know about the Bridgeport Hotel. I know everything, Becky." She seemed to physically shrink at those words, her shoulders slumping, her eyes dropping to the table. When she looked back up, there were tears in her eyes, but they didn't move me. "Not now." "How'd you find out?" she asked quietly. "Does it matter? The point is I know, and I want to hear you say it. Tell me the truth for once." She took a deep breath, let out slowly. "Yes, I'm pregnant. About 3 months. And it might not be yours," she whispered. "Might not be. We both know it isn't mine, Becky. We haven't been intimate in months." More tears spilled down her cheeks. "I'm sorry, Dwayne. I never meant for this to happen." I laughed bitterly. Never meant for what to happen? The affair? The pregnancy? Getting caught? Which part exactly are you sorry about? She had no answer for that. Just more tears, more mumbled apologies that meant nothing. "The divorce papers will be ready soon," I said coldly. "Don't make this harder than it has to be." The weeks following our confrontation were some of the most difficult of my life. Becky didn't take the news of divorce lying down. Once the initial shock wore off, she went on the offensive. "You can't just throw away 7 years of marriage," she argued one night, blocking my path as I tried to leave the kitchen. "We should at least try counseling." I laughed bitterly. "Counseling? For what, Becky?" "To discuss how you've been sleeping with another man. How you're carrying his child. What exactly would be the point? People make mistakes, Dwayne. Affairs happen. Marriages survive them all the time. This isn't just an affair," I reminded her coldly. "It's a baby. His baby. A lifetime connection to the man you cheated with. That's not something I'm willing to accept." As the reality of the situation sank in, her tactics changed. The woman who had barely acknowledged my existence for months suddenly couldn't do enough for me. Cooking my favorite meals, asking about my day, even trying to initiate physical contact, which I rebuffed immediately. "Don't," I said, pulling away when she tried to touch my arm one evening. "You made your feelings clear when you said you couldn't stand me, remember?" Her face fell. "I didn't mean that. I was just confused. Scared. Too little, too late." The divorce proceedings moved forward. Jason, my lawyer, warned me it could get messy if Becky decided to fight it. And fight it she did. She hired a shark of a lawyer who demanded everything. The house, spousal support, even a portion of my retirement fund. Her argument? That she'd sacrifice career opportunities to support mine during our marriage. A blatant lie, but one that would be hard to disprove in court. She's playing hardball, Jason warned during a meeting in his office. But we got the affair as leverage. That should help our case significantly. The DNA test was the final nail in the coffin of our marriage. I insisted on it, needing absolute confirmation of what I already knew. When the results came back, proving the baby wasn't mine, something shifted in Becky. The fight seemed to go out of her. She became subdued, almost defeated. I later learned why. Edwin Daniels, her lover, had disappeared from the picture as soon as the pregnancy became publicly known. The man she'd risked everything for, the man she'd chosen over me, had abandoned her the moment things got complicated. He said he wasn't ready for a child, she admitted during one of our final meetings with the lawyers. Said I should have been more careful. Her voice was flat, emotionless. He blocked my number, changed his email. I felt no satisfaction in her pain, no vindication in knowing the man she'd betrayed me for had betrayed her in turn. Just a deep, profound sadness for what could have been, for the life we might have had if she'd made different choices. The court ultimately sided with me on most issues. Becky got enough to start over, but nowhere near the windfall her lawyer had initially demanded. The house was sold, the proceeds split according to the judge's ruling. Our joint accounts were divided. The legal ties that had bound us together were systematically cut, one by one. The day the divorce was finalized, I felt nothing but exhaustion. No closure, no sense of triumph, just relief that it was finally, officially over. It's been a year since my divorce from Becky was finalized. A year of rebuilding a life I never thought I'd have to rebuild at 47 years old. They say time heals all wounds, but whoever they are, they've clearly never had their life blown apart by betrayal. I still think about her sometimes. Wonder how she's doing with the baby, a little girl I heard through mutual friends. Wonder if Edwin ever came back into the picture, or if she's raising the child alone. Not that it matters to me anymore. I made my clean break and never looked back. The full story of what happened came out in bits and pieces over time, mostly through those same mutual friends who couldn't help but share the gossip. Apparently, Becky met Edwin at a work conference 6 months before I noticed any changes in her behavior. It started as a casual flirtation, escalated to texting, then to secret meetings whenever he was in town. When she found out she was pregnant, she went to him expecting support, maybe even thinking they could build a life together. Instead, he told her to take care of it, and disappeared. By the time she realized he wasn't coming back, she'd already pushed me so far away there was no path back. She regrets it. You know, my former neighbor Tom told me over beers one night. Says it was the biggest mistake of her life. I just nodded, feeling nothing. Her regrets weren't my concern anymore. She'd made her choices, and I'd made mine. As for me, I sold my share of the house profits and bought a smaller place closer to downtown. Joined a local gym, reconnected with old friends I neglected during my marriage. Started dating again, cautiously. Nothing serious yet, but I'm open to the possibility. Last week, I ran into Becky at the grocery store. It was bound to happen eventually in a city this size. She had the baby with her, a dark-haired little thing strapped to her chest. She looked tired, older somehow, though it had only been a year. "Dwayne," she said, clearly surprised. "How are you?" "Good," I replied, a minute. "I'm doing good." An awkward silence fell between us. What do you say to the woman who blew up your life? Who carried another man's child while still wearing your ring? "I'm sorry," she finally said, her voice barely above a whisper. "For everything. You deserve better." I nodded, acknowledging her words without accepting the apology she seemed to be offering. "I hope things work out for you, Beck. And for her." I gestured toward the baby. "Her name's Emma," Becky said. "Edwin's not in the picture." I figured as much. Another silence, heavier this time. "Well, I should go," I said, eager to end this unexpected reunion. "Take care of yourself." As I walked away, I waited for the pain, the anger, the regret to surface. But there was nothing, just the quiet certainty that I'd made the right decision. The truth is, I'm grateful for what happened. Grateful that I paid attention to the warning signs, that I trusted my instincts when something felt off. If I hadn't, I might still be with a woman who could look me in the eye and lie. Might be raising another man's child, living in a marriage built on betrayal. Instead, I'm free. Free to build a new life on my own terms. Free to find someone who values loyalty as much as I do. Free to be with a woman who, when she says she loves me, actually means it. That's my story. That's my truth. And if there's one lesson in it for other men, it's this: trust your gut. When something feels wrong in your relationship, it probably is. Don't ignore the signs. Don't make excuses. Face the truth head on, no matter how painful. Because the pain of confronting a hard truth is nothing compared to the pain of living a comfortable lie.